Catherine Zeta-Jones, the jewel of Wales, the irreplaceable treasure of Hollywood. A woman whose beauty seemed sculpted from myth, whose voice and presence turned stages and screens into living poetry. She was not only Elena in the Mask of Zorro, the fire that captivated millions, not only Velma Kelly in Chicago, who danced her way into an Oscar. She was the pulse of cinema itself, the enchantress who gave her body her grace, and her unyielding talent to a world desperate for magic. In an industry swollen with vanity and fleeting illusions, Catherine radiated something different. Timeless elegance in an age of artifice. A rare soul whose charm silenced skeptics, whose dignity elevated the craft above gossip. She was not just admired, she was revered, a living reminder that artistry could still triumph over noise. And yet, behind the glitter of applause, shadows gathered. The court battles for her wedding's stolen photographs, the tabloid storms that gnawed at her privacy, the cruel stigma of her bipolar disorder whispered through headlines, the loneliness of a woman balancing fragile mental health against relentless fame. Behind every dazzling red carpet lay nights of silent struggle and storms unseen. Now, at 55, she carries the weight of fragility more openly. Controversies sparked by offhand words, health challenges that refuse to release her, and a marriage tested by time and illness. Do not look away, for what Catherine Zeta-Jones endures now may be the deepest chapter of her story, a reminder that even legends bleed beneath the spotlight. The first wounds of Catherine Zeta-Jones were not carved by tabloids or fame, but by the quiet streets of Swansea, where she was born into a modest family that carried both love and limitation. A father who worked as a confectioner, a mother who sewed costumes, both striving to provide stability in a small Welsh town that seemed too narrow for the dreams of their daughter. And a girl who would learn early that talent could be both a gift and a burden, that the same spotlight that promised salvation could cast long shadows over innocence. Catherine Zeta-Jones entered the world on September 25, 1969. Even her name carried a melody, a fusion of her grandmother Zeta, and the old Welsh surname Jones, as if destiny itself had stitched performance into her identity. By childhood, her voice and beauty already seemed too luminous to remain hidden in Swansea. Yet, like many who dream of escape, her beginnings were not embroidered with ease, but with relentless struggle. Her family's modest means meant that Catherine's path to the stage was paved with sacrifice. Her parents enrolled her in dance and performance schools, sometimes stretching their income thin just to keep her in classes. At only 11, she won a national tap dancing competition, her feet pounding rhythms that felt larger than the tiny stage that contained her. Soon, she was traveling with a theater troupe, performing in musicals like Annie, while other children lingered in playgrounds. For Catherine, childhood was never about simplicity. It was about preparation, discipline, and the silent pressure of being told she was destined for more. School offered little comfort. Her striking looks and early confidence drew as much envy as admiration. Whispered gossip marked her as different, and different in a small town was dangerous. Teachers expected excellence, peers expected her to stumble. Behind her smile lay a girl carrying the weight of both promise and scrutiny. To cope, she retreated into performance, losing herself in characters and costumes, as though theater could provide the sanctuary that classrooms never gave. At 15, Catherine left Swansea to pursue roles in London's West End. While most teenagers still clung to school corridors and weekend dances, she was standing beneath the harsh stage lights of 42nd Street, understudying lead roles, and eventually seizing them. For a girl barely out of childhood, the stage was not just opportunity. It was exile, a place where she had to grow up fast, where applause replaced lullabies, and discipline became the only currency for survival. Her first heartbreak was not of romance, but of belonging. Moving from a Welsh town to London meant leaving behind the familiarity of family dinners, the safety of her parents' small home, the comfort of being just another face in the crowd. She learned that dreams demanded distance, that every ovation came with the price of solitude. Nights spent alone in small apartments, meals eaten in silence, her only company, the echoes of the stage she had just left. By the end of her teens, Catherine had endured what might have crushed others. The pressure of early fame, the loneliness of distance, the heavy responsibility of carrying her family's hopes, and the ache of being both extraordinary and isolated. It was an apprenticeship in endurance, teaching her that joy could vanish as swiftly as a curtain falls, and that applause fades quicker than loneliness. And yet those wounds did not diminish her. They forged her. A modest home gave her humility. The gossip of peers gave her resilience. The exile of the stage gave her discipline. What she lost in ordinary adolescence, she gained in the unyielding strength that would one day make her not only a star, but a survivor. Looking back, Catherine would admit that dreams were never free. They were bought with solitude, with sacrifice, with the unhealed ache of a girl who grew up faster than anyone should have. Her childhood was not simply a prelude to stardom. It was the crucible where fragility and fire collided, shaping the luminous, conflicted woman the world would come to know. When the ordinary childhood of Swansea could no longer contain her, Catherine did not surrender to small-town silence. Instead, the stage called her forward, and a girl who had sacrificed adolescence for rehearsals discovered that performance could become refuge. What she did not yet know was that this new dream would demand not only beauty and talent, but the same hunger and endurance that had already defined her young life. By the time she stepped away from ordinary classrooms, she had already decided that art would be her salvation. The West End became her battleground. At only 15, she left home, trading the security of family for the unrelenting grind of London stages. She began in chorus lines, understudying stars in 42nd Street, and within months seized leading roles with a ferocity that stunned older actors. These were not glamorous beginnings. They were survival wages for a girl who had already made survival her second skin. Late nights rehearsing modest flats, where meals were simple, and silence was heavy applause that vanished too quickly once the curtain fell. Yet, from those dim backstage corridors came the first flickers of recognition. British television beckoned, casting her in series like The Darling Buds of May, where audiences were captivated not only by her beauty, but by a warmth and charisma that seemed impossible to contain. Almost overnight, Catherine was a household name in the United Kingdom, a sensation whose smile lit up millions of homes. But even triumph carried teeth. The industry began to murmur that she was too beautiful, that her roles were ornaments rather than characters, as if talent could be erased by cheekbones. Casting agents studied her with narrowed eyes. Was she an actress of depth, or simply a dazzling face for light entertainment? In a business that devoured starlets, by the dozens, the gates of serious cinema seemed locked. Catherine, armed with little more than relentless discipline and unyielding ambition, knocked until they cracked. Then came the moment that changed everything. Hollywood noticed. In 1998, she was cast opposite Antonio Banderas in The Mask of Zorro. The role revealed a soul far deeper than anyone had expected. Catherine was not only radiant, she was fierce, layered, commanding. Critics who had once dismissed her whispered a new truth that she possessed a gravity too raw to be manufactured. But destiny, merciless as ever, played its tricks. The very triumph that should have freed her also caged her. Zorro made her a global star, but the airhead label of just beauty clung stubbornly a cage of another kind. Even after entrapment and her Oscar-winning turn in Chicago, she felt the weight of those early whispers. Fame had arrived, but it was not a gentle gift. It was another uphill climb. And yet, in those lean years amid doubts and typecasting, Catherine was proving something greater than stardom. She was building endurance. The same resilience that had carried her from Swansea's narrow streets to London's demanding stages was now carrying her through Hollywood's fickle gates. The girl who once left home with suitcases half-packed had learned to carry her sanctuary inside herself. Persistence, humility, and a refusal to quit. The world had not yet crowned her a legend, but she had already revealed the truth that mattered most. She would not break. Catherine Zeta-Jones entered Hollywood not as its golden child, but as an outsider, a Welsh newcomer whose accent and radiance made her unforgettable yet suspicious in an industry quick to reduce women to ornaments. Tall, poised, carrying more ambition than connections, she faced a city that had chewed up countless dreamers. Yet the screen soon revealed what others had overlooked. In The Mask of Zorro 1998, she was not simply a love interest draped in costume. She was firewit and command-moving, with a precision that made Antonio Banderas look less like her partner than her equal opponent. It was the first glimpse of her paradox beauty and gravitas bound together, every smile edged with steel. The tide shifted, and the world began to notice. That tide surged with speed. In Entrapment 1999, her chemistry with Sean Connery lit up theaters. And in Chicago 2002, she did more than dance and sing, she devoured the screen. As Velma Kelly, she became a revelation. Her voice sharp as a blade, her movements thunderous. And when the curtain fell, she was holding an Academy Award. Overnight, Catherine was vaulted into the stratosphere. Yet when Hollywood offered her typecast roles, the shallow imitations of what she had already conquered, she resisted. She refused to trade integrity for repetition. That refusal was a line drawn in blood. Critics whispered that she was difficult, studios labeled her reckless. The early 2000s became another crucible. Films like The Terminal showed her versatility, yet gossip about her marriage to Michael Douglas overshadowed artistry. The very triumphs she had earned now became cages, tabloids, dissected her age gap, questioned her motives, and headlines clung to her as tightly as applause once had. And then the shadows grew heavier. The revelation that she lived with bipolar disorder shifted the story from her films to her fragility. While audiences marveled at her elegance, she was enduring cycles of exhaustion, sleepless nights, and the stigma of a condition still widely misunderstood. For Catherine, every role demanded not only craft, but also the quiet battle of keeping her mind steady beneath the glare of cameras. She bent cinema into brilliance, but off-screen she bent herself into agony. For audiences, her Oscar was triumph. For Catherine, it was destiny written in sacrifice. Success carved directly into her body and mind. Applause, as always, was fickle. When the credits faded, the old doubts returned, too glamorous to be serious, too fragile to be reliable. The same words that haunted her youth now echoed through headlines. Misunderstood, mislabeled, mocked Catherine climbed anyway. Each insult became another stone on the mountain she refused to stop ascending. By midlife, she had become not just a star, but a survivor proving that glory has never been gentle. Every triumph left a scar. Every ovation hid hours of suffering. The world saw the sparkling gowns, the graceful dances, the Oscar in her hand. But behind the curtain was a woman whose body and soul bore the cost of every cheer, whose heart carried losses no trophy could erase. And just as she stood highest, the private tragedies were waiting ready to remind her that even the brightest fame could never outshine grief. Catherine Zeta-Jones has always been draped in elegance, but the story of her heart was never a carousel of champagne and red carpets. It was more fragile, more turbulent, a mystery carried in silence, and revealed only in fragments. To the world, she was the jewel of Wales, the Oscar winner, the woman whose beauty seemed untouchable. But inside love was never effortless. It was a battlefield where devotion and despair often walked hand in hand. In her early years in Britain, whispers of romances swirled around her rising fame. Young men enchanted by her voice and her striking looks came and went, but Catherine was already claimed by ambition. Nights spent on stage in 42nd Street, days consumed by auditions, left little room for permanence. Those first entanglements flickered like matches, burning bright but short, leaving her with the awareness that intimacy and ambition rarely lived in the same room. Fame was seductive, but it was also a thief. It took away the simple chance to love without the world intruding. When Hollywood opened its gates, destiny did not come disguised, it came as Michael Douglas. Introduced in 1998, their connection defied calculation. He was 25 years her senior, already an icon carved into the granite of cinema. She was luminous, just beginning to stride across the world stage. To outsiders, their difference in age was scandal or curiosity. To them, it was recognition. Two lives tempered by scrutiny finding shelter in one another. Catherine once said that Michael told her, "On the very first night, I'm going to be the father of your children." It was audacity, but it was also prophecy. Yet the marriage that followed was not simply a fairy tale. Their 2000 wedding in New York, beneath chandeliers that caught the glint of forever, was instantly violated. Stolen photographs splashed across tabloids, their vows reduced to commodities. They sued not for vanity, but for dignity. It was their first lesson as husband and wife. Love would always need defense. Privacy would never be granted, it would have to be fought for. In the years that followed, love blossomed in the form of children. Dylan arrived in 2000, Karis in 2003. Catherine's life was suddenly rescored by lullabies instead of applause. She juggled scripts and bedtime stories, studio contracts and school calendars. There were moments of exhaustion, but also the sublime revelation that motherhood was the one role she did not have to audition for. And yet, as joy deepened, so did the storms circling her home. In 2010, the world collapsed into a single diagnosis. Michael had throat cancer. The man she loved, the anchor of her family, was suddenly fragile, his voice and strength threatened by an illness that offered no guarantees. Catherine became both wife and soldier, fighting alongside him through the long nights in hospital corridors. She stood on red carpets in couture, but the images hid her private prayers, the silent bargains she made in waiting rooms. The toll was crushing, and while Michael endured the fight of his life, Catherine's mind began to fracture under the weight. By 2011, the secret she had carried surfaced. She was diagnosed with bipolar II disorder. For years, she had concealed it, surviving through sheer will. But the pressure of Michael's illness and the spotlight's cruel scrutiny pulled her into collapse. She checked into a treatment center, emerging weeks later to headlines that branded her fragile. Yet the truth was courage. In admitting her illness and seeking help, she had done what many fear she refused to drown in silence. Again in 2013, she sought treatment, proving that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the refusal to surrender to it. That same year, her marriage staggered. She and Michael separated not with dramatic statements, but with the weary honesty of two people carrying too much. The tabloids feasted predicting divorce. But love for Catherine was not an ornament to be discarded. It was labor. And so they worked. They rebuilt. Reconciliation came quietly, without spectacle. It came in groceries carried together in shared silences that no longer needed explanation. Their marriage endured because it was made not of illusion, but of effort. And yet the tragedies did not stop at her doorstep. Friends and colleagues disappeared too soon, stolen by accidents, by illness, by the same unforgiving hand of time that spares no star. Catherine carried those losses into her performances. Behind the elegance of her characters lay the echoes of funerals attended in silence, the weight of conversations never finished. Critics called her mature, layered, magnetic. What they did not see was that every role was laced with real grief, transmuted into art. Now at 55, her love story is both a victory and a scar. She has survived stolen privacy, cruel headlines, a husband's cancer, her own battles with mental illness, and the constant intrusion of strangers into her most sacred vows. And still, she stands. Still, she smiles with a dignity that whispers of nights spent in tears and mornings survived by will. Her marriage, scarred but enduring, is a testament to resilience. Her children, grown and thriving, are the quiet legacy of her devotion. Her career, selective but radiant, is proof that reinvention is possible even after storms. Catherine Zeta-Jones's heart has known joy, but it has also known shadows most will never see. She is not the untouchable goddess the magazines once declared her to be. She is more human, more fragile, and more formidable than that myth ever allowed. And perhaps that is why she remains luminous. Because beauty fades, glamour dims. But the courage to love through heartbreak, to stand through tragedy, to turn private scars into public strength, that is the kind of radiance time cannot erase. Life had never been gentle with Catherine Zeta-Jones, and it would not soften now. This time, fate's cruelty came not in the form of paparazzi flashbulbs or scathing headlines, but in the slow, merciless erosion of the people closest to her and the fragile balance of her own mind. In 2010, when Michael Douglas was diagnosed with throat cancer, Catherine's life became a pendulum swinging between the blinding lights of Hollywood and the sterile corridors of hospitals. On screen, the world still saw her as the dazzling enchantress, the Oscar-winning star who seemed untouchable. Off-screen, she was a wife in hospital chairs, holding her husband's hand as radiation drained him, whispering prayers into sterile air, hoping each day would not be their last together. The contrast was unbearable. One night she stood beneath chandeliers in couture gowns, fans calling her name. The next she sat in medical corridors, her voice hushed, her heart split open by fear. Friends remember her devotion, how she canceled commitments to remain by Michael's side, how she spoke of his fight as though it were hers, how she turned down offers not out of caprice, but out of necessity. Because some days, nothing mattered more than simply sitting in that chair, listening to the hum of machines, and being present when life itself trembled on the edge. The toll carved itself into her. The stress of Michael's illness, the glare of tabloids, the relentless scrutiny pushed her own health into crisis. Bipolar II disorder was a battle she had carried quietly for years, but under the weight of fear and exhaustion, it surged into the open. In 2011 and again in 2013, she sought treatment. Headlines framed it as collapse. The truth was far stronger. It was survival. It was the act of a mother and wife refusing to vanish under illness, the choice to step into therapy and medication with the same courage she had once given to the stage. For Catherine, it was not a scandal. It was a vow that her children would not lose their mother to silence, that her marriage would not crumble under shadows unnamed. And from that crucible of sorrow grew a hidden legacy. Without press conferences or spectacle, Catherine began lending her time and her voice to mental health awareness. She spoke with unusual honesty, for a star of her magnitude naming the illness that so many whisper about in shame, offering her own story as proof that even under the fiercest spotlight, vulnerability could be met with compassion. With Michael, she has quietly supported hospitals' cancer research and children's charities, acts not of charity for credit, but of gratitude for every doctor who steadied her husband's breath, for every therapist who steadied hers. She has used her wealth not as monument, but as a shield for others, building pathways she wished had been there when she stumbled. But sorrow did not only creep in slowly. Some losses struck like lightning. The sudden deaths of colleagues and friends in the film world left her shaken. Co-stars who had once shared laughter at wrap parties were gone far too soon, leaving premieres haunted by empty chairs. For Catherine, these were not just names in obituaries. They were fragments of her own journey, vanishing reminders that the industry which gave her so much also exacted merciless tolls. She carried those ghosts into her work. Every subtle ache behind her character's smiles, every shadow beneath the elegance bore the imprint of friends who should have walked alongside her, but did not live long enough to do so. The world will never see the countless nights she lay awake, fearing Michael would not survive another round of treatment, or the days she forced herself out of bed when bipolar depression pulled her down. Those invisible nights shaped her as surely as any role. They gave her performances their depth, their fragile humanity. They taught her children resilience. They forged in her a devotion to kindness that did not require headlines. Catherine Zeta-Jones has carried illness and loss in silence. But she has also turned them outward into legacy. She has shown that love, patient, steady, and selfless, can survive in the shadow of death. She has proven that wounds borne quietly and with dignity can transform into empathy. Each role she takes now carries an echo of those battles. Each charitable act carries a whisper of gratitude. Her story is not simply one of glamour, but of survival, of turning scars into compassion and private grief into public strength. In the end, her life is a reminder that greatness does not come from what the world sees on screen. It comes from the unseen, the hospital corridors, the therapy rooms, the quiet moments of resolve. Catherine's survival is not just her triumph. It is her redemption. Proof that even in a life stalked by relentless trials, there are battles worth fighting and bonds no darkness can erase. The body, like the mind, has limits. For Catherine Zeta-Jones, each triumph has etched those limits deeper, until even applause began to carry a weight. The gowns, the trophies, the red carpets, they dazzled the public, but they also concealed the bruises of discipline and the invisible scars of a woman who had given everything to her craft. Fame crowned her with glory, but it also demanded a price in bone, in spirit, and in silence. It began with Chicago. Months of brutal rehearsals carved themselves into her muscles. Hours of dance left her gasping, her body screaming for rest. The discipline was merciless, but the result was transcendent. As Velma Kelly, she electrified the screen, and the Academy handed her an Oscar. To the world, it was glamour. To Catherine, it was the ledger of sleepless nights and aching joints. Each ovation had already been paid for long before the curtain rose. The industry, however, is relentless. After The Mask of Zorro and Entrapment, Hollywood wanted her beauty on repeat. Casting agents whispered that she was too stunning to be taken seriously. Tabloids swirled about her marriage, her family, her every gesture. Even as she proved herself again and again, the chorus of doubt refused to fade. And behind the brilliance of her performances, another battle raged, one the public could not see. Bipolar II disorder shadowed her days, demanding hospital stays in 2011 and 2013. Headlines labeled it fragility, but the truth was fiercer. It was resilience, the bravery to fight openly for her own balance while the world stared. Then came the storm that tested not her body, but her heart. In 2010, Michael Douglas was diagnosed with throat cancer. Catherine's life split in two dazzling premieres and silent hospital corridors. One night, she was draped in jewels. The next, she was holding her husband's hand as radiation drained him. The stress was unbearable, carving itself into her psyche, amplifying the battle she was already fighting inside. Yet she endured. She stood beside him when cameras were gone, proving that love is not a red carpet vow, but a vigil kept through the longest nights. The years did not spare their marriage. In 2013, they separated briefly, tabloids circling like vultures. But reconciliation came not with spectacle, but with quiet labor. They chose to rebuild, to endure together, to admit that survival sometimes requires distance before it allows reunion. Their bond grew not from perfection, but from persistence. Now, at 55, they call themselves empty nesters, their children Dylan and Karis grown and gone. In interviews, she smiles softly when asked about this season. It is, she says, a chapter of rediscovery of love, measured not by grand gestures, but by the steady rhythm of endurance. Her present life is not ruled by quantity, but by choice. Catherine selects roles like a jeweler selects stones, weighing them for worth. Prodigal Son in 2020 allowed her to explore psychological depth. Ocean's 12 reminded the world of her poise amid an ensemble of giants. And in 2022, Wednesday introduced her to an entirely new generation. As Morticia Addams, she became Gothic Grace incarnate, proving that reinvention is possible even in midlife, that women at 55 can still command the cultural stage without apology. These choices are not about proving relevance, they are about preserving integrity. She does not chase every offer. She chooses the ones that let her speak truth through art. Home has become her sanctuary. In New Jersey and New York, and on the island of Mallorca, she carves out space where silence can breathe. Glass walls opening onto gardens, kitchens, where she cooks for family verandas, where twilight lingers. These are not trophies of wealth, but vessels of peace, reminders that life is more than spectacle. Here she is not Velma or Morticia. She is simply Catherine, a wife, a mother, a woman who has carried storms and still smiles. And yet the weight of fame is never gone. A stray remark on a talk show can ignite outrage in hours. A photograph can become a verdict. Catherine has learned to let the noise pass, to walk through flames without feeding them air. The hardest lesson in celebrity is to know what deserves response and what deserves silence. She has mastered it not by retreating into bitterness, but by guarding the sacred corners of her life. Philanthropy for her is not performance, it is gratitude. She lends her name to mental health awareness, offering her story as proof that vulnerability is not weakness. With Michael, she supports hospitals and children's charities, giving quietly, without spectacle. These acts are repayment for the doctors who steadied her husband, for the therapists who steadied her, for the unseen hands that have held her family. Her legacy is not only in films that shimmer, but in gestures that ripple far beyond the cameras. Time has left its fingerprints. The beauty that once stunned Hollywood has not faded, it has deepened. The silver in her hair, the gravity in her gaze, the confidence in her silence all speak of a woman who has survived. The industry that once reduced her to surfaces must now reckon with the truth Catherine Zeta-Jones has outlasted its whispers. She is not the ingenue she once was. She is rarer a survivor who still glows. At 55, her life is paradox and proof. Proof that beauty can evolve into gravitas. Proof that fragility can coexist with strength. Proof that reinvention is possible even when the world has already written its verdict. Paradox, because the more we learn of her, the more we sense the compass point she will never reveal. The mystique is not artifice, it is boundary. That is how she keeps joy intact, by letting it live where headlines cannot trespass. Perhaps that is why audiences lean closer when she appears on screen. They see not just elegance, but endurance, not just a star, but a woman who has carried storms and still stands open to light. They feel in her performances the echo of hospital corridors, the hush of therapy rooms, the silent fortitude of marriage rebuilt. She does not announce these truths. She embodies them. And that embodiment is what lingers long after credits fade. Greatness in Catherine's story is not the absence of cost. It is the decision to pay the right prices for the right things. She has paid with her body, with her mind, with her silence, and the return is not simply fame. It is coherence. A life that fits itself, a career that looks itself in the eye. She has given everything to art, and at last, she has given herself permission to live. And now, the question belongs to you. When you look at Catherine Zeta-Jones today, at the woman who dazzled as Elena, who conquered as Velma, who redefined herself as Morticia, what moves you more? The glamour that first captured the world, or the resilience that has kept her here? In an age of noise, does her quiet strength, her willingness to endure, her choice to survive with grace, speak to your own life? If her journey has touched you, share your reflection. Because Catherine Zeta-Jones's story reminds us that greatness is not measured by fortune or fame, but by how gently one carries both joy and sorrow when the applause fades.